When The Lord of the Rings entered production, it was not conceived as three separate films, but as a single, continuous story, divided only by necessity, an approach that immediately set the project apart from anything Hollywood had attempted before, because director Peter Jackson made the unprecedented decision to shoot the entire trilogy simultaneously, committing cast, crew, and studio to a vision that would take years to complete, without knowing whether audiences would accept the first installment at all. Filming stretched across more than 400 days, scattered over several years, demanding an almost military level of logistical coordination, while New Zealand itself was transformed into Middle Earth, not merely as a filming location, but as a defining visual identity that shaped the world audiences would come to believe in. Before any of this could happen, however, the project faced significant resistance, as multiple studios rejected the idea outright, unwilling to risk such a massive investment on a fantasy property considered commercially uncertain at the time. Even when New Line Cinema agreed to take the risk, the scale of the ambition remained contested, with the studio initially pushing for two films rather than three, a compromise Jackson resisted in order to preserve Tolkien's narrative structure. From the beginning, the trilogy was planned as a unified cinematic experience, with story arcs, character development, and visual continuity mapped across all three films rather than reset between installments. To realize this vision, an enormous production apparatus was assembled, involving more than 2,000 crew members, and leading to the creation of Weta Workshop, which would become legendary for its craftsmanship and innovation. At the time, the budget was widely viewed as a gamble that could either redefine the fantasy genre or collapse under its own weight, making the release of The Fellowship of the Ring a decisive moment not only for the films themselves but for the future of large-scale franchise filmmaking. When that first film succeeded, it retroactively validated years of risk, preparation, and belief, securing the completion of a project that had been built on faith long before proof existed, and establishing The Lord of the Rings not just as a trilogy, but as a singular cinematic undertaking whose origins were defined by audacity, patience, and a willingness to attempt what had never been done before. The casting of The Lord of the Rings was shaped as much by chance and timing as by deliberate design, revealing how the final identity of the trilogy emerged through a series of pivotal decisions made under pressure, because some of the most iconic performances were not part of the original plan, most notably the casting of Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn, who joined the production only after filming had already begun, replacing another actor at the last moment and stepping into a role that would ultimately define his career. Mortensen's commitment to the character extended far beyond the script, as he chose to keep Aragorn's sword with him off-set and later purchased his full costume as a personal memento, blurring the boundary between actor and role in a way that shaped his physical performance. In contrast, Sean Bean's experience on set was marked by personal challenge rather than immersion, as his fear of flying led him to climb the mountainous filming locations in full costume each day rather than take a helicopter, adding an unplanned authenticity to his physical exhaustion on screen. Ian McKellen, tasked with bringing Gandalf to life, often found himself performing in isolation due to the forced perspective techniques used to portray scale differences, requiring him to act opposite empty space or stand-ins rather than fellow actors, a process he later described as emotionally demanding despite its technical necessity. Orlando Bloom, cast as Legolas with little prior experience in large productions, had never ridden a horse before joining the film, yet was quickly trained to perform complex riding sequences that would become central to the character's visual identity. The physical toll of production was real, as Bloom suffered broken ribs during filming but continued working, reflecting the broader culture of endurance that characterized the shoot. John Rhys Davies, who portrayed Gimli, endured hours of discomfort daily due to heavy prosthetics, a process he openly disliked despite his appreciation for the role. Elijah Wood, whose performance as Frodo required sustained emotional vulnerability, often kept the One Ring prop with him even when cameras were not rolling, reinforcing his connection to the character's burden. Christopher Lee brought a unique authenticity to the cast as the only actor who had personally met J.R.R. Tolkien, grounding his portrayal of Saruman in first-hand memory of the author's presence, As production continued, bonds formed among the actors that extended beyond performance, leading several members of the fellowship to permanently tattoo a symbol representing their shared experience. A quiet testament to how the casting process did not merely assemble performers, but forged a collective identity that would resonate on screen and endure long after filming concluded. The physical reality of The Lord of the Rings is one of its least visible yet most defining qualities, because behind the illusion of epic fantasy lies a production that relied heavily on real bodies, real movement, and real endurance, often at significant personal cost to those involved. Many of the weapons used on set were crafted from metal rather than lightweight substitutes, requiring actors and stunt performers to train extensively to avoid serious injury during complex fight choreography. Viggo Mortensen's now famous kick of a Uruk-hai helmet was never intended to become legendary, yet the resulting scream of pain was genuine, captured in a moment where the fracture of his toe went unnoticed by the audience, but not by the actor himself. The authenticity of the battle sequences was further reinforced by the decision to train stunt performers, many of whom had military or martial backgrounds, to move as cohesive units rather than isolated fighters, giving the combat a grounded and disciplined quality. Horses, essential to the visual language of the films, underwent months of specialized training to remain calm amid noise, movement, and simulated chaos, allowing cavalry scenes to be staged with minimal digital interference. Despite this preparation, accidents were unavoidable, as Orlando Bloom sustained injuries after falling from a horse, yet continued filming once cleared, contributing to the production's reputation for perseverance under pressure. Andy Serkis, whose performance as Gollum redefined motion capture acting, endured some of the harshest physical conditions, frequently crawling across sharp rocks and cold terrain to achieve the creature's distinctive movement, long before such performances were fully integrated into digital workflows. Large-scale sequences, such as the confrontation with the Balrog, required months of rehearsal and planning, combining stunt work, practical effects, and precise timing to ensure safety while preserving intensity. Contrary to common assumptions, many of the Uruk-hai seen on screen were portrayed by real actors in full costume, rather than digital creations, enhancing the tactile presence of the antagonists. Even environmental conditions played a role, as battle scenes were often filmed in genuine rain, mud, and wind, adding to the strain on cast and crew, but lending the final footage a weight that could not be replicated artificially. Through this reliance on physical commitment, The Lord of the Rings achieved a level of realism that continues to resonate, reminding viewers that much of its cinematic power is rooted not in illusion alone, but in the willingness of its performers to endure discomfort and risk in service of a believable world. One of the most overlooked achievements of The Lord of the Rings lies in its extensive use of practical effects and large-scale miniatures, which formed the visual backbone of Middle-earth long before digital enhancements were applied. Entire cities such as Minas Tirith and Helm's Deep were constructed as massive physical models, known within the production as bigatures, designed to be filmed at high speed and with real lighting in order to replicate the behavior of full-scale environments. These miniatures were not rough approximations, but meticulously detailed structures in which every stone, stairway, and battlement was individually sculpted and painted by hand, allowing the camera to move through them as if they were real locations. Helm's Deep alone existed in multiple physical versions, enabling different angles of destruction to be filmed practically before being integrated with live-action footage. Fire, water, and smoke effects were frequently real rather than simulated, with controlled explosions and flowing water used to enhance realism and provide natural interaction with light. Many sets were designed to be partially destroyed and rebuilt repeatedly, allowing different stages of battle damage to be captured without relying solely on post-production. The armories created for the films produced thousands of usable weapons and pieces of armor, each designed to function believably rather than serve as static props. Even siege weapons such as catapults were constructed to operate mechanically, launching real projectiles under controlled conditions. This emphasis on tangible effects extended to the sets themselves, which were often built large enough for actors to fully inhabit, reinforcing spatial awareness and physical performance. By grounding Middle-earth in physical craftsmanship, the filmmakers ensured that digital effects would enhance rather than replace reality, resulting in a visual texture that remains convincing decades later. Because it is anchored in materials that respond to gravity, light, and wear in ways that no purely digital environment could replicate. While the physical craftsmanship of The Lord of the Rings grounded Middle-earth in reality, it was the careful and innovative use of digital technology that expanded that reality beyond physical limits, marking a turning point in cinematic history. One of the most significant breakthroughs was the creation of Gollum as a fully realized digital character capable of conveying complex emotion, a feat that reshaped how audiences and filmmakers understood CGI performance. Unlike earlier digital characters, Gollum was not animated in isolation, but performed on set by Andy Serkis, whose physical acting informed the character's movement, timing, and emotional nuance long before final rendering took place. This approach helped establish modern motion capture as a performance-driven process rather than a purely technical one. At the same time, the films required a way to depict battles involving tens of thousands of soldiers, a scale impossible to achieve with extras alone, leading to the development of the software known as Massive, which allowed individual digital soldiers to operate autonomously, each with programmed behaviors and reactions rather than repeating animations. This innovation gave the battle scenes an organic unpredictability, as digital armies appeared to fight rather than simply move in formation. Importantly, CGI was rarely used in isolation, but layered carefully with practical footage, miniatures, and live actors to preserve visual consistency. Many scenes audiences assume to be fully digital are in fact composites of multiple techniques, blended to avoid drawing attention to any single method. Even large creatures such as the Balrog were created through a combination of practical fire elements and digital enhancement, ensuring that light and motion interacted realistically with the environment. The filmmakers were also willing to revise and refine digital effects late into post-production, adjusting lighting, texture, and movement until the illusion felt seamless. By treating CGI as an extension of physical filmmaking rather than a replacement for it, The Lord of the Rings set a new standard for visual effects, demonstrating that digital technology could serve storytelling and performance without overwhelming them, and establishing a model that would influence epic filmmaking for decades to come. The costumes of The Lord of the Rings were designed not simply to clothe the characters, but to communicate history, culture, and personal transformation without the need for dialogue, making wardrobe one of the trilogy's most subtle storytelling tools. Each culture of Middle-earth was given a distinct visual language, with the Rohirrim drawing inspiration from early medieval and Viking aesthetics, emphasizing mobility, practicality, and a warrior society shaped by open plains and horses. Elven clothing, by contrast, was crafted with flowing lines and organic patterns, reflecting a culture deeply connected to nature and continuity, while the costumes of orcs and Uruk-hai were intentionally asymmetrical and crude, assembled from mismatched materials to suggest a society built on exploitation rather than tradition. Frodo's wardrobe evolved gradually across the films, with multiple versions of the same outfit created and aged by hand to reflect the physical and psychological toll of the journey, ensuring continuity while allowing visible deterioration. This aging process was applied to nearly every costume, as garments were repeatedly distressed, dirtied, and repaired to mirror the passage of time and hardship. The Hobbit's iconic bare feet were achieved through custom prosthetics, individually molded for each actor to ensure comfort and consistency across long shooting days. Weapons and accessories were designed with similar narrative intent, as swords, armor, and jewelry reflected social status, heritage, and personal identity, rather than generic fantasy aesthetics. Even background characters were given unique costume variations, preventing repetition and reinforcing the sense of a lived-in world. Attention to detail extended to elements most viewers would never consciously notice, such as embroidery, stitching, and wear patterns, all of which were crafted to suggest years or centuries of use. Through this meticulous approach, the films ensured that Middle-earth felt coherent and authentic at every scale, demonstrating that visual storytelling is often most powerful when it operates quietly, embedding meaning in texture, fabric, and form rather than spectacle alone. One of the most quietly ambitious elements of The Lord of the Rings films lies in their treatment of language, which was approached not as decorative fantasy, but as a structural component of world building that reinforces history, identity, and emotional weight. Rather than inventing sounds arbitrarily, the production drew directly from Tolkien's constructed languages, adapting Sindarin and Quenya for spoken dialogue while preserving their internal grammar, phonetics, and cultural logic. Actors portraying elves were coached extensively on pronunciation and rhythm, ensuring that spoken Elvish felt consistent and intentional rather than improvised, and this care extended even to brief lines that appeared only once on screen. Several scenes feature dialogue spoken entirely in Elvish without translation, trusting the audience to absorb meaning through tone, context, and performance rather than exposition. Tolkien's approach to language, in which linguistic invention preceded narrative creation, shaped the films as well, as inscriptions, songs, and written texts were treated as meaningful artifacts rather than visual noise. The inscription on the One Ring, for example, was rendered in a fully coherent script, readable and grammatically correct within the internal logic of the world. Choral elements throughout the films frequently employ Tolkien's languages, or linguistically consistent constructions, blending sound design and language into a single narrative tool. Howard Shore worked closely with linguistic consultants to ensure that musical phrasing aligned with the cadence of the languages being sung, allowing music to function as dialogue beyond spoken words. Even non-Elvish speech patterns were treated deliberately, as accents and vocabulary choices subtly distinguished cultures without resorting to caricature. This linguistic discipline reinforced the sense that Middle-earth existed long before the camera arrived and would persist after it left. Because languages, once established, imply generations of use and change. By grounding dialogue and sound in coherent linguistic systems, the films achieved a depth that audiences may not consciously analyze, yet instinctively feel, demonstrating that immersion often depends not on how much is explained, but on how consistently meaning is embedded within every spoken and unspoken word. The music of The Lord of the Rings functions not as background accompaniment, but as a parallel narrative, guiding the audience's emotional understanding of Middle-earth with the same precision as dialogue or imagery, because composer Howard Shore approached the trilogy as a single evolving musical work, rather than three isolated scores. Each major culture of Middle-earth was given its own musical identity, built around specific instruments, harmonies, and melodic structures, allowing the audience to recognize places and peoples through sound alone. The One Ring itself is associated with a distinct musical motif, subtle and unsettling, which shifts in tone depending on who is influenced by its presence, reinforcing the idea that power alters perception, rather than announcing itself openly. Shore's score evolves across the trilogy, with themes introduced early returning later in transformed or diminished forms, mirroring the journeys of the characters and the changing state of the world. To achieve this depth, the production employed specialized instruments, some of which were rare or custom built, to evoke textures not commonly heard in modern orchestral music. Choral elements play a central role, with male, female, and mixed choirs used to convey scale, tragedy, and inevitability, often singing in Tolkien's languages or linguistically consistent constructions. The recording process itself was monumental, involving separate sessions for orchestra, soloists, and choirs, later layered with meticulous attention to balance and narrative timing. Sound design worked in tandem with the music, as effects such as the hum of the ring or the roar of the Balrog were tuned to blend seamlessly with the score rather than compete with it. Shore's work was recognized with multiple Academy Awards, but its lasting influence lies in how it redefined the role of music in epic cinema, proving that a score could carry memory, culture, and meaning across hours of storytelling. Through this integration of music and sound, the trilogy achieved an emotional continuity that binds its vast narrative together, allowing the audience to feel the passage of history not only through images, but through recurring melodies that echo long after the final scene fades. The editing of The Lord of the Rings was as monumental a task as the filming itself, because the sheer volume of footage captured during the simultaneous shoot required years of careful selection, restructuring, and refinement to shape a coherent cinematic experience. Each film went through multiple narrative assemblies before arriving at its theatrical version, with early cuts often running far longer than audiences would ever see, forcing difficult decisions about pacing, focus, and emotional clarity. The editors worked closely with Peter Jackson to ensure that each installment functioned as a complete film while still serving the broader arc of the trilogy, a balance that demanded constant reassessment of where to begin, where to linger, and where to cut. As a result, dozens of fully filmed scenes were removed from the theatrical releases, not because they lacked quality, but because they disrupted momentum or shifted emphasis away from the central journey. These decisions eventually gave rise to the extended editions, which restored many of these sequences to provide greater narrative depth, character development, and world building for viewers willing to engage with a longer format. Some characters gained significantly more screen time in these extended cuts, allowing their motivations and relationships to unfold with greater nuance than was possible in the cinema versions. The pacing challenges were particularly intense given the intercut structure of the story, as multiple plot lines had to advance simultaneously without overwhelming the audience or diminishing tension. Editing also played a crucial role in shaping tone, determining how long moments of silence or reflection could be sustained between large-scale action sequences. The post-production process extended for months after principal photography, with sound, music, and visual effects continually influencing final editorial choices. Rather than treating editing as a purely technical phase, the filmmakers approached it as a final act of storytelling, where restraint was as important as inclusion. Through this process, The Lord of the Rings demonstrated that what is left out of a film can be as meaningful as what remains, and that the endurance of the trilogy owes much to the discipline required to shape an epic narrative without losing its emotional core. The legacy of The Lord of the Rings extends far beyond its original release, because the trilogy did not merely succeed as a series of films, but reshaped the expectations and possibilities of modern cinema, particularly within the fantasy genre. Across its theatrical run, the trilogy accumulated a total of 17 Academy Awards, a record-setting achievement that culminated in The Return of the King winning every Oscar for which it was nominated, an unprecedented sweep that signaled the industry's recognition of the project as a singular accomplishment rather than a niche success. This recognition marked a turning point in how fantasy was perceived, demonstrating that stories rooted in myth and imagination could achieve both critical respect and mainstream appeal without sacrificing complexity or seriousness. In the years that followed, the trilogy became a reference point for large-scale filmmaking, influencing the structure, tone, and ambition of later franchises that sought to replicate its balance of spectacle and emotional depth. Its production model, which emphasized long-term planning, cohesive world building, and respect for source material, is now studied in film schools as an example of sustained creative vision under extreme logistical pressure. The films also helped redefine the relationship between audiences and extended content, as the popularity of the extended editions demonstrated a demand for deeper engagement with narrative worlds beyond theatrical constraints. Culturally, the trilogy fostered a global, intergenerational fan base, introducing Tolkien's world to viewers who might never have encountered it through literature alone, while simultaneously revitalizing interest in the original texts. Middle-earth became a shared cultural language, with lines, images, and musical themes entering collective memory far beyond the context of the films themselves. Even decades later, the trilogy continues to be restored, re-released, and discussed, not as a relic of its time, but as a benchmark against which epic storytelling is measured. Its endurance lies not only in technical achievement, but in the sincerity of its craftsmanship, a commitment to treating fantasy as a space for moral reflection rather than escapism alone. By proving that patience, detail, and respect for narrative could coexist with commercial success, The Lord of the Rings secured a lasting place in cinematic history, leaving behind a legacy that continues to shape how stories of scale, courage, and imagination are told on screen.